So in the spirit of collaboration, we do sometimes invite fellow podcasters onto the New Statesman podcast, and we're delighted to be joined by fellow podcaster and also Shadow Climate Change and Net Zero Secretary and former Labour leader Ed Miliband. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the New Statesman podcast. I think it's my first appearance, so
first of many, we're sure.
First of many, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, welcome to your debut, and actually we've got you at the right time because Keir Starmer has just finished his party conference speech, and actually I did think when I was listening to it, it kind of has your fingerprints all over it, doesn't it?
Well, I thought it was a great speech, and it was very much Keir's work and Keir's speech, and I think it set out a set of election choices, basically. I think, we've seen what the Tories have to offer in the last few days. I mean, financial chaos, but also a view of the country which is it succeeds when a few at the top do well. So-called trickle-down economics. And I think Keir was laying out a very different vision. And of course, at the heart of that is how you create jobs with a green economy, and an economy for the many, but with green as very much a central part of it. I thought he did a brilliant job. I thought he did a brilliant job content-wise. I also thought it was actually delivered brilliantly. As somebody who's delivered these speeches in the past, they're a trial, to put it mildly, and I thought he did great.
How do you feel watching those speeches, having done those speeches yourself?
Thankful that I'm not doing it. No, I thought he did. I thought he did really well, and and I think I hope what people have seen this week is, yes, in a sense that the backdrop has been the chaos in the markets and all of that, but you've seen Labour laying out an agenda for the future. My view of politics is big ideas are our friend, and whether it's zero carbon power by 2030, a new national wealth fund for Britain, GB Energy, publicly owned generation company. I think these are big ideas to change our country.
On the GB Energy policy, which obviously was announced today, does that mean that Labour would nationalise energy companies? Can you just give us a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah, it's not about nationalising existing companies. It's about setting up a new public generating company, Freddie. And why are we saying that? Because we've looked around the world at the countries that do well on renewable power. The top 10 countries for renewable power, all of them have state-owned energy companies, apart from us. And there's this amazing fact, which is 45% of our offshore wind assets, so nearly half, are owned not simply by foreign companies, but by foreign governments. And that's because other governments have recognized the need to invest for the future, and that gives you the advantage of jobs, security, and also speed of transition. So it's not replacing the private sector, but it is going to be an important player in the energy system.
And the story of this Labour conference has really been the energy theme, hasn't it? It opened with that 100% clean energy by 2030 pledge. Then you have this great British energy announcement and also the slogan, a fairer, greener future. I mean, that obviously, that's no accident. Why did Labour decide to hang its conference around this?
Because, look, Keir, Rachel and I have been having this discussion over the last few months, and we made the climate investment pledge, 28 billion a year, at last year's conference, and we'd always envisaged that for this year's conference, if you like, some of the fruits of that investment would be made apparent. That was sort of setting out the pledge. And this was, if you like, filling in some of the detail. And of course, the energy bills crisis is massive for so many people. And I think what's really important about this fairer, greener is why green? Well, of course, because of the climate crisis, but also crucially, it will lower energy bills if we go green, because as Keir said in his speech, renewables are 9 times cheaper than gas. It gives us energy security, homegrown zero carbon power, and it is this sense of the future, the economy of the future, the green economy of the future. So yeah, it's been absolutely centre stage, and I think that's been very much the right thing.
Yeah, the world has changed a lot in the past 3 days. The UK economy has changed massively in the past 3 days, and many of these speeches have been written over the past few months. I know Rachel Reeves' speech, for instance, they started work on it in July.
Yeah.
What changes do you think are going to happen to Labour policy, given that we've now got predicted a 68 billion pound deficit by 2026? I mean, surely Labour have now less money to implement their policies.
Well, look, we've always been very cautious about making commitments precisely for the reason that we wouldn't know what the economy was going to be like at the time of the next general election. We've got a very important pledge on climate investment. Why is it right to borrow for that climate investment? Because we've been open about that. It's because unlike some tax cuts for the rich, it actually has a return. If Liz Truss is right about one thing, which is we need to grow our economy, but we're not going to do it with trickle down, but we are going to have to invest in our country. And so, yes, we've seen chaos. Yes, it's going to make the fiscal position even tighter. And Keir was right to say in his speech that it's going to be harder for us, and we're not going to be able to do everything all at once. But we do need to change the direction of this country. So, I think you're right that, in a sense, I think the dividing line has become starker in the last. Well, with the Truss government, it's become starker. I always thought that Boris Johnson had this self-description of himself, which is a Brexity hezzer. In other words, he was for Brexit, but he was for intervention. Yeah. Liz Truss is not a Brexity hezzer. She we've seen the tax cuts, we've seen what's going to potentially happen to borrowing, but we haven't yet seen the cuts to public services, but they are probably coming down the track. Yeah. So we've seen a Tory party retreat to very much a pre-Cameron right-wing Tory party. That makes the divide stark. And the battle lines of the election are obviously being drawn.
Yeah, and speaking about Brexit, obviously that was a theme that Starmer addressed in his speech. I thought that was very interesting, trying to reach out to those voters and also recognising that many people voted not for reasons about trade or about Northern Ireland, but more as a sense that something had gone wrong and that we need to invest in public services. How intentional was that, do you think? I mean, how much does Keir or Starmer recognise that he needs to acknowledge that he voted Remain and also was a key part of Labour's policy in Brexit post-referendum, and he has to reach out to those voters who potentially were isolated in 2019?
I thought it was a very powerful, I think you're right to pick up on it, I thought it was a very powerful part of the speech. And I represent a constituency that voted more than 70% for Brexit, one of the biggest numbers in the country. And people often ask me why, and you're completely right to say, people say, is it about immigration, is it about Europe? Of course it's about some of those things, but it was this demand for change, this sense of our economy doesn't work for us. I want a better future for my kids and grandkids. That was the message I heard. And so, the green economy might seem some distance away from that, but actually it is about saying we can deliver the change you've been waiting for. You voted for this change in 2016. Brexit hasn't yet delivered that change to people. We will deliver that economic change that you wanted to see.
And we've been talking about the general atmosphere around this Labour conference, and there is a sense of optimism. Activists and advisors feel upbeat when you're speaking to them at the drinks receptions and things. And obviously Keir Starmer was introduced on stage as the next Prime Minister. Did you have ever have a conference when you were Labour leader where you had a sense of that optimism? And would you advise some caution?
I'm the eternal warrior against complacency. This is a phrase that Tony Blair used to use, but it sort of speaks to my experience. Look, we've seen poll leads of whatever it is, 17 points today. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, and people are comparing that to 2014, aren't they, quite explicitly?
Yeah, and look, Keir Starmer is a very level-headed guy, and he's not going to get ahead of himself. He knows, as he said in his speech, we've got a big fight on, a big fight for the future of the country. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a landslide or a walkover. The Tories aren't just going to sort of say, okay, we'll leave office now, you can take over. It's going to be a big fight. But the building blocks are gradually being put in place. And you'll see more policy from Labour, I'm sure, over the coming months. And, I think it is this thing that we're determined to make the weather in our country. We're determined to make the weather in terms of speaking to the issues that people care about and showing we've got big ideas for the future.
Well, thank you very much. I know you've got to get off and do all sorts of other things as well. So thanks for joining us and taking the time.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ed.